Hello, everyone, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. Hope everyone's having a great week. Football season is finally upon us. It's super exciting. There's a lot going on and a lot to talk about. And week one should be really, really fun. And I hope everyone's looking forward to it as much as I am because I definitely missed football and watching preseason games felt really good to have it back in some way. So looking forward to, what should hopefully be kind of a regular normal season this year. So that should be good too. So I'm really excited for it. And I'm excited to introduce my guest that I have with me for this week. He works for NESN covering the Patriots, does a fantastic job of Patriots coverage. And I really enjoy his content on social media and everything else. So Zack Cox, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Gabby. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining me on the show. I really do enjoy your content, so I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So, just to start off, kind of before we really get into it, could you just kind of talk a little bit about kind of how you got involved in working in sports and your path?
Yeah, it started for me a little bit back in high school, and then really in college. I went to UNH up in New Hampshire. I worked for the student newspaper up there, and that's when I really sort of decided that this was what I wanted to do for my career. And I was fortunate enough to land at NESN pretty shortly after I graduated. I think it was like 6 months, 6 months out of school. Kind of started down at the bottom and worked my way up from there. And now this is going to be my sixth season on the Patriots beat. I did a season on the Celtics, a season on the Bruins, a bunch of Red Sox stuff back then, and yeah, now I've been full-time Patriots since 2016. So it's been a very interesting couple of years, that's for sure.
I'm sure it definitely has. Yeah, that sounds awesome, and it's cool that you've been able to get a chance to cover all of the Boston teams too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was nice to get to do that earlier in my career because I'm from Massachusetts too, so I watched all these teams growing up. So it was definitely exciting, but football's always been my number one sport. So I've been very fortunate to be able to do this for the last 6 years now.
Yeah, I think that's great, and especially because what better way than to be working and covering the teams that you love anyway, that you would be watching at home anyway, and just being able to cover those teams.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I've been extremely fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fantastic. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to football season this year. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about when it comes to the Patriots. I'm really excited to see what they can do this year. And just to start off on that, I mean, the biggest thing that I want to cover and get your opinion on, first of all, is the quarterback situation. And I don't know about you, but I definitely was surprised that they actually made the move to cut Cam and just roll with Mac Jones. And it seems like they're really, really putting a lot of eggs into the Mac Jones basket. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's the Mac Jones show now. The Patriots really are speeding up this process of him being the quarterback of the future. He's both the quarterback of the future and the quarterback of the present now. I agree with you. I was a little bit surprised when they made this decision. I actually thought that coming out of the preseason, coming out of those joint practices that he had with the Giants, I thought that Mac Jones was the best option for the Patriots. I thought the Patriots should start him in week one, but I just didn't think they were going to, just based on the way that Bill Belichick handled the whole quarterback situation during the preseason, with Cam Newton starting all three preseason games, Mac Jones not getting any work with the starters in either of the last two preseason games. It just seemed to be shaping up to be a situation where Cam Newton was going to start the season and then Mac Jones was eventually going to take over at some point. But yeah, Bill Belichick made the call. It is interesting that they do have a 2-week break between the preseason and the regular season this year, which is new. So there is more time to get a guy in there and change some things around. And Mac Jones did get a lot of work with the first team offense and all those plays during training camp. But yeah, definitely happened a little bit sooner than I was expecting Bill Belichick to pull the trigger on this.
Yeah, I mean that's how I feel about the situation too, because I really did think that Mac looked really good in the preseason, and he was definitely showing a lot of promise there. But just knowing Bill and kind of the way that he runs things, I really thought that he was going to keep Cam around and have him start at least at the beginning of the season. And then just kind of, if he wasn't performing, then maybe bring Mac in type of thing. And I thought that's really how it was going to be handled, or at least keep Cam as a backup. But I feel like Cam probably didn't want to stay as a backup, and that he maybe the release was kind of more mutual, that he asked to be released if he didn't want to be a backup here. That's kind of what my thoughts were on that as well.
Yeah, we haven't heard exactly what the behind the scenes conversations between Cam and Bill were like with that, but I think it makes sense, honestly, if you're going to roll with Mac Jones as the starter, to not have Cam Newton as that backup. Yes, he's a more talented player. He would be a better option than, say, a Brian Hoyer if, say, Mac Jones got hurt or his game just tanks and you need to go to somebody else. Cam Newton would be a better option than whoever the Patriots backup is going to be this year, most likely Brian Hoyer. But he's got such a large personality. He's such a big figure in that locker room. He's obviously a former MVP. He comes from he's had a long and successful football career. I think it just makes things a little bit more difficult for both for Mac Jones and for the team if you have a guy of that stature as the person behind him. Now, I do think I can see Cam Newton maybe going to another team and picking up a backup job somewhere else. I think that's a slightly different situation because you're not in a locker room that kind of you had led for the previous year. You're coming into a new situation, and circumstances are going to be a little bit different if he's elsewhere. But yeah, I think I agree with the decision to move on from Cam Newton if he's not going to be the starter. I just think it creates some potential distractions, some potential weird feelings within the team and the locker room. So I think this was probably the best course of action.
Yeah, and I mean, Cam was a good leader and a good teammate for sure. And I know that his teammates really respected him here. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. I think in terms of distractions, it probably was best because this is a team that was led by Cam last year. And so staying on this system as a backup probably just might not work out really chemistry wise if you're really rolling with your rookie quarterback as your guy. So I do see what you're saying, that if he ends up somewhere else as a backup, he might be more open to that idea just because he'd have to learn a new system anyway. So being a backup to somebody else elsewhere is a little bit different than being a backup in a system that you just spent the last year learning and really leading the team in. So it definitely is a little bit different if he were to move on and go elsewhere. I mean, I would be a little bit surprised if he doesn't end up somewhere. I think there are some teams that he could go. I just don't really see him starting.
Yeah, I don't think any team is going to bring him in with the intention of him being a starter. I mean, maybe if you get some injury midseason on a team that has some really shaky quarterback depth, a team like the Jets or a team like the Texans or something like that. But yeah, some of the most obvious landing spots for Cam have already pretty much said that they're not going to bring him in. In Washington, he has the connection with Ron Rivera, but Rivera said that he's happy with Washington's current quarterback setup. The Cowboys were mentioned as a potential suitor. They kind of said that they're not really interested right now. So it may be a case for Cam Newton. I agree that I do think he'll end up somewhere at some point this season, but it could be a little while. It could be a case where he has to wait for some team to have an injury in October and desperately needing a quarterback for them to give him a call. I'm going to be really interested to see where he ends up through all this.
Yeah, me too. And Dallas was definitely one of the teams that I thought was a genuine possibility, just because I still feel like there are some question marks with Dak.
Definitely.
And after everything that he went through last season, and the question really being, can he stay healthy? So I thought that Dallas might be an option, but that, like you said, might be a type of situation where maybe they're a team that brings him on later in the season if Dak doesn't stay healthy and they're looking for a quarterback. But I don't think by week one he'll really end up somewhere, because I think it seems like every team as of right now is pretty set with the quarterbacks that they do have.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a little bit of a waiting game for Cam Newton, kind of similar to what he went through last summer, where he had to wait 3 months or so in free agency for him to find a new contract. Maybe it won't end up being quite that long, but I do think it's going to take a little bit for him to find a new home.
Yeah, I do wish him the best though. I really do. I think that his leadership presence was really valued here, and so I would like to see him, hopefully end up somewhere because he definitely. I mean, he went through some tough times, like in the coming in a COVID season to New England and having to be the starting quarterback is not easy. So I do definitely wish him the best, and I know that most other Patriots fans do as well.
No, I agree. I mean, from covering Cam Newton the last year, from a reporter's perspective, he was fantastic. I mean, he was super helpful to us, super accountable through what had to have been a incredibly difficult season for him because you mentioned the COVID. He joined the team late. This is a very difficult offense to learn. He really struggled with that all season. He admitted that. He also didn't really have many pieces around him. I think the Patriots roster around him was probably their weakest overall since going back all the way to 2000. This just wasn't a very talented Patriots team, especially at some of those offensive skill positions. So a lot of things were working against Cam Newton last season, and he was, as I mentioned, accountable. He was a stand-up guy. He was, according to everybody who was in that locker room who's talked about it, he was a very good leader for that team last year. And from talking to a couple Patriots players this week, they've all kind of said that same thing. They do wish Cam Newton the best elsewhere, and they're all hoping that he lands on his feet somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I know that Patriots Nation really acknowledges all of that too, just all the struggles that came with the season last year. But I mean, at the end of the day, he really wasn't the guy, I don't think, to really lead this team to where they have to go. And when you draft somebody like Mac Jones into your system, like that's somebody that you hope is going to be your guy long term. And so the fact that he's going to be starting right away really shows me that Belichick trusts him already, and that he really, it seems like he knows the playbook already, and that he's just, that he really, really feels like he's ready to go, because it's hard to really not trust anything that Bill chooses to do. So it just says to me that he really does feel like Mac is ready to go.
He does, and his teammates do, his coaches do. It's been really interesting just to hear people talk about Mac Jones over these last couple of weeks. I mean, excuse me. I mean, you see it on the field. We saw it in training camp. We saw it in the preseason. The kid's obviously talented. He's obviously picking things up quickly. He's moving in the right direction quicker than you would expect a rookie quarterback to do. I'm sure he's going to have some rookie mistakes and some rookie moments this year. He's not going to be perfect. Nobody expects that. But just talking to his players and his coaches, they're pretty blown away with what he's been able to do so far, with how he's been able to run the offense, how he's able to pick up the playbook, running the 2-minute drill, making the checks at the line, even just kind of ingratiating himself into this locker room, which still has, even though a lot of the Super Bowl era Patriots are gone now, there's still a lot of big veteran voices in this locker room. And for a rookie to come in and really earn all these guys' respect right away is pretty remarkable. And if you hear Patriots players talk at all, it's a lot of generalities. It's a lot of kind of coach speak, team speak, especially with rookies. You rarely hear these guys really pumping up rookies. But over the last couple of weeks, you've heard Matthew Slater, Dante Hightower, Brian Hoyer, Kendrick Bourne, Jonnu Smith, Trent Brown, all of these guys just really raving about Mac Jones. And it's very clear that even though the locker room loved Cam Newton last year, he was a good leader for this team. It's very clear that the Patriots they're in on this decision. This has the approval of the locker room. There's no question about that. They are high on Mac Jones, and they believe he's the right choice for the team.
Yeah, which is super important because you really need to have that kind of chemistry and that kind of respect from your teammates when you're the quarterback. And so it's really, really important that they all feel that way, because that to me is super promising, that they like what they've seen from him too, and they trust that he's the guy that can help lead them to success. And I do think that's going to be super exciting to see how he performs, and just especially when he gets into, real actual games that aren't preseason.
Yeah, and because that's a kind of a dangerous move when you're moving from a veteran to a rookie who is unproven, has yet to play a single regular season snap. There is the risk of the locker room and his teammates saying, what are we doing? Why are we going to this guy? He's a rookie. He's not ready. Why are we moving on from Cam? I know he wasn't great last year, but maybe he can improve, all those kind of things. And that is a definite risk when you make a move like this. But again, yeah, from talking to players and coaches and all of those type of people over the last couple of weeks, it really seems like they are very much on board with this decision. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Mac Jones actually fares once he gets into real live regular season games, because he hasn't had a ton of experience against actual first team starting NFL defenses. I think the fact that he was able to play against the Giants starting defense a lot in one of those joint practices really showed a lot to me, and I think showed a lot to his coaches and teammates as well. But in those preseason games, he was mostly playing against second and third team guys. Like a lot of those defensive players that he was playing against aren't even going to be on rosters this season. So it definitely will be a challenge for him, and something that he's going to have to prove early in the season. Can he continue this success against actual legit NFL defenses and defensive coordinators who are going to actually be showing him the real stuff, not showing him those vanilla kind of standard looks that usually you see in the preseason? And I mean, his first opponent is going to be Brian Flores, who came from the Bill Belichick coaching tree, is a very talented defensive mastermind, defensive signal caller. So it's going to be a tough challenge for Mac Jones right off the bat.
It is. Yeah, it's definitely not going to be easy. And that's why I'm so intrigued by what can he really do when he's playing against real legitimate defenses, as opposed to, backups and second and third string guys. So that's one thing that I definitely am going to be looking out for. But speaking of rookies, what are your thoughts on the kicker situation? Because that was another one that, I liked what I saw from Quinn Nordin, especially at the beginning of preseason. Then he kind of fell off a little. Then he started, playing pretty well again. But I thought at the end of preseason that he was going to end up going with Folk as the kicker.
I did too. This was a mildly surprising move in my eyes. I did think Nordin kind of righted the ship a little bit at the end of the preseason. He rebounded pretty nicely from that game in Philadelphia where he missed 3 kicks. But I mean, still, this is a guy that went 10 for 15 on all of his kicks across the preseason, which is not a particularly good rate for an NFL kicker. And I do think there's still room for some movement here. I don't think this competition is officially finished, because the Patriots did re-sign Nick Folk to the practice squad. And with the NFL's practice squad rules that they put in place last year and that are continuing this year, you can bump up a practice squad player at any point. So the Patriots even theoretically could move Nick Folk up before this season opener and have him kick against the Dolphins instead of Nordin. So it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing shakes out, because I agree. I think it was a little, in my mind, it seemed to be a little premature, even though Quinn Nordin he's got a much higher ceiling than Nick Folk. He's got potential. He's young. He's got a huge leg, but that accuracy and that consistency is still a bit of a question mark. This could have been a situation where the Patriots wanted to have Nordin on their practice squad and Nick Folk on their roster, but they weren't sure whether they'd be able to get him through waivers. They had a similar situation with Corey Bojorquez, their punter, a couple years ago, undrafted guy. They didn't have him punt at all during the preseason. They were hoping to carry him on their practice squad, and then the Bills came and swooped him out and signed him, claimed him off waivers. So this could be a sort of roster management play, but we'll see. It could be Nordin in week 1. He could be their full-time kicker from here on out, but I'm not going to view this as a kind of finalized roster decision until Nick Folk is no longer with the organization.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. And I think that that's a really good way to think about it too, because I think it does allow for a lot of flexibility. And if he's not really looking like he's able to perform, even if he does play in week 1 and he is the kicker in week 1, but he doesn't really perform, then it does allow for that flexibility to bring Folk back up, who you know is somebody that you can rely on, at least until Nordin continues to develop more anyway. So I think that just having that flexibility and just having him still being present and being able to be brought up at any time is probably one of the most important parts of that whole decision. Yeah,
100%. And you're seeing the Patriots use these practice squad rules to their advantage. They're kind of manipulating these rules in obviously a very legal way. These are they're following all the rules, but they're using these this additional flexibility to kind of to give themselves a little bit more wiggle room roster wise. Like right now, they only have one quarterback on their 53-man roster. That's not usually the case, but since they can elevate guys from the practice squad, they can bring Brian Hoyer up or elevate him to the 53-man roster in weeks 1 and weeks 2. I think if the rules are still the same as they were last year, you can elevate a player twice before you have to give him a permanent spot on the roster. So they theoretically could go with only one quarterback on their 53-man roster for the first 2 weeks of the season, use that roster spot on another player, and then kind of make that decision a little bit further down the road. So yeah, it's definitely been interesting to see how teams have been able to sort of use these rules to kind of give themselves some extra flexibility.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's really good that they implemented that too. And, when I realized that you have Mac Jones starting and then you're really sticking with Brian Hoyer as your main backup, I was like, that's still a little concerning to me, I think that I think that I have to trust the system and kind of trust what Belichick is doing here and just hope that that's going to work out for them.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if they end up bringing somebody else in at some point. It seems unlikely at this point. They brought in Garrett Gilbert, but he's basically just a practice squad arm, I would think. And then Jared Stidham is supposed to be healthy. I think the original timetable that was reported was late October-ish. He's on the PUP list. He'll be eligible to return in week 7. So this could be a case where for the back half of the season, the Patriots will have Mac Jones as their primary starter, Stidham as their number 2, and then Hoyer as their number 3, who is mostly a kind of coach on the field, mentor type for Mac Jones, because I do think that having somebody like that in the building is very valuable. And I know that Brian Hoyer has been able to help Jones out a lot over these last couple of months. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this quarterback room sort of morphs and continues to take shape over the next couple of weeks and months. But I do expect Brian Hoyer to be that number 2 guy, at least until Jared Stidham is able to come back.
Yeah, because at least he knows the system and he's been there and he has that veteran presence and the experience aspect that Mac doesn't have yet. So I think having somebody like that to help guide him in his first season is going to be super important. So that's why I do like the fact that not so much playing wise physically on the field that Brian Hoyer's there, but just that aspect of having that veteran presence and there who's just kind of able to help mentor him, like you said, while he's in his first season and he's still really learning everything and getting exposed to real NFL play.
Yeah, I mean, other than Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady, there's probably not anybody in the NFL that knows the Patriots offense better than Brian Hoyer, just considering he's been in New England for so long. Obviously, there was a big gap in between his stints. I think this is actually his 3rd stint with the team, but he's spent like 7-8 years in this system. So yeah, he is an ideal mentor to have in the room with Mac Jones this early in his career as he sort of continues to digest all of these things and sort of shape his game for the NFL level.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to really see how that all plays out with him. It's going to be one of the most intriguing storylines of the Patriots this year for sure. It's just how's Mac going to perform and everything else. But they have, he went out in free agency this year, builded and made some key moves to really, really improve this roster this year. So in terms of just in general, since Mac has more to work with than Cam did last year, where do you see the Patriots stacking up in terms of the division this year? Because I still think Buffalo wins the division. I'm not ruling out Miami by any means. And then there's the Jets. But where do you kind of see the Patriots in terms of that mix with the division?
I think they'll be competitive. I think this is a double-digit win team unless a lot of things go wrong. I just think they're so much more talented than they were last year. And last year they were still able to win 7 games. I think this is 10 wins minimum as long as Mac Jones doesn't completely fall apart and they don't have a bunch of devastating injuries on defense or their offensive line doesn't fall apart. Like I think the Patriots have the talent to be a 10, 11, maybe even 12-win team this year. I agree with you. I do still view the Bills as the favorite in the AFC East. They went, I think, 13-3 last year, went all the way to the AFC Championship game. They bring back most of their roster from last year, even added a couple pieces like Emmanuel Sanders. I think they're still, you got to consider them the team to beat going into this season, but I think the Patriots will be in the mix. I think it's going to be a situation where we're getting down to week 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and this is still a competitive race in the division. And if I had to make a prediction right now, I would probably say the Patriots, I say they get to either 10 or 11 wins and they get a wild card spot. I do agree that I think Miami will be in the mix as well. I'm not totally sold on Tua just yet. I know, according to the reports out of Miami, he's been a lot better this summer than he was last year. But I got to see it on the field before I consider them a legit contender. But this should be a fun season in the AFC East. It should be very competitive. I don't think the Jets are going to be in that mix yet, but I do like a lot of the things that they did this offseason. I like a lot of the things they did in the draft. And I like Robert Saleh, their new head coach. So I think this is maybe a situation where in 2022, 2023, 2024, you're seeing the Jets make their way back up into that mix. But I do at least think they'll be not one of the worst teams in the entire NFL this year. I think you'll see a little bit of improvement from them. So yeah, it should be an exciting season in this division.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be the team that everybody's laughing at for much longer, really, because they are headed in the right direction and they are getting some good pieces over there, I feel like, to help move them in that right direction. But you're right. I still do think it's going to be another year or two before they're genuinely competitive and can actually be taken as seriously as the other teams in the division. And you touched on a lot of my thoughts too, because Tua still needs to prove more. And I think he's going to be the big question mark with the Dolphins this year. I mean, there's talent over there and there's pieces over there, but can he really be the guy is going to be the question. And I think this is the season where he has to really start to show that he can be reliable and be their guy to really take them, to success. And last year they almost made the playoffs. Like, they were not too far off from making the playoffs last year, but Tua definitely struggled. So it's really going to be a matter of what can he do. But Buffalo is definitely solid. They're going to be a tough team to beat. So the division is going to be really fun to watch this year, I think.
Yeah, I think with Miami too, you're looking for them to finally find some stability. I mean, last year you saw them change quarterbacks 3 or 4 times. They've basically overhauled their roster in each of the last 3 off seasons. The last off season they went out, spent a ton of money in free agency, and now the majority of those guys that they got are now gone. I mean, some of them are back in New England with Kyle Van Noy and Ted Karras. It seems like they keep trying different things and they haven't really been able to find the mix that they want. They've definitely been competitive, and I think Brian Flores is a really good head coach. I think he's one of the better young head coaches in the NFL from an on-field kind of X's and O's standpoint. But just from an overall organizational standpoint, the Dolphins just really seem like they've been a little too herky-jerky. They need to figure out a mix that works, and so far they haven't been able to do that. So I'm very interested to see how their whole season shakes out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and my prediction for the Patriots this year before the preseason started, after I saw the moves they made in the offseason, my original prediction for them was 11-6. So I'm kind of feeling somewhere around there in that range, that if they could come out with a 10-7 or 11-6 type of record, then that would be considered a good season for them and a major improvement from last year. And if you think about last year, considering everything, they really did not have a terrible season at the end of the day, considering everything and the fact that there really were not a lot of weapons on offense last year either. And the defense the defense was kind of broken last year too, with, the COVID opt-outs and the injuries. So overall, considering everything, it really wasn't as much of a mess as it could have been.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I feel like thinking back to last year, we feel like the Patriots went like 4-12. They won 7 games somehow. And yeah, I mean, their weapons were really weak. Their defense was just much leakier than it has been in a long time. Their defensive line wasn't good. Their edge rushers weren't good. Their linebackers weren't good. Their secondary was pretty good. But overall, yeah, there were just so many holes on that roster last year. They somehow made it to 7 wins. And if a couple of late game plays had gone a little bit differently, that could have been a 10-win team. I mean, they almost won in Seattle. They almost won in Buffalo. They almost won in Houston, I believe it was. Obviously, they had some late game moments that went their own way against the Jets and the Cardinals and a few other ones. But yeah, this was a team that wasn't all that far away somehow from being almost a wild card contender. And then you see the moves they made this offseason. It's impossible to say that they haven't significantly improved on paper, at least. So the obvious question is how all of these pieces are going to come together, because traditionally in the NFL, when teams go out and spend a ton of money in free agency, that doesn't usually lead to success on the field. I mentioned the Dolphins a couple minutes ago. You even have the Jaguars a couple years ago, the Philadelphia Eagles back in the early 2010s. Just it's typically isn't the proper team building method in the NFL to just go out and throw a ton of money at big time free agents. But I think the Patriots are better coached than a lot of those teams. I think the Patriots have more institutional stability than a lot of those teams. So if any team is going to sort of buck that trend and actually put a legitimately competitive team on the field after going out and spending big in free agency, it's definitely Bill Belichick and the Patriots.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, that's why I definitely feel pretty good about the season overall. Cause like you said, they're really well coached. And I think the guys that Bill brought in, he hasn't given me a reason really to doubt any moves that he's made thus far, being a Patriots fan. So I think that just all of those moves that he made, it's pretty much impossible for them to not be an improvement from last year, with as long as everybody can stay healthy, obviously. And I think it's those two tight ends. I mean, that's going to be really fun to watch too. And the defense, especially with how much they've improved. And, they're deep at the running back position, which is really nice too. I was sad to see Sony Michel go, but also not surprised because they were just so deep at that position. And, I think they really like what they saw from Ramondre Stevenson in preseason too.
Yeah, I think that was just a numbers game. I'm sure they would have been perfectly happy with keeping Sony Michel in this final year before his contract expires. But yeah, you're not going to keep 6 running backs on your roster. And as you mentioned, Ramondre Stevenson looked great this preseason. JJ Taylor looked great this preseason. Obviously, both of those guys were playing against lower level competition, the same as Mac Jones playing against second and third string guys in the preseason. So we'll see how that translates to the regular season. But yeah, they've got a ton of depth there. Damian Harris has looked like a legitimate number 1 back this summer. So as long as he can stay healthy, I think he'll be locked into that number 1 role. And then yeah, you have all these contributors in there. You can afford to part ways with a guy like Michel, pick up a couple draft assets. He's probably a guy that wasn't going to be back next season anyway. So it seemed like a pretty good move for both sides. Sony Michel gets a little bit of a fresh start, maybe a larger role out in Sean McVay's offense, and Patriots get a couple draft picks back for him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good problem to have because it just shows that you already have a lot of other options at that position anyway. And so it wasn't a matter of really him not performing, but more so just they just had a lot of other options and they just decided they could afford to make that move. And it just made sense strategically at the time with all the other options they had.
Definitely. And Sony Michel actually looked really good this preseason. He had one of his better summers overall that I'd seen from him. He was able to stay healthy, was contributing more in the passing game, looking good as a runner. And yeah, he was, as I said, I'm sure they would have been totally fine with using him in their offense this season. But yeah, this was a case where they were just a little bit overloaded and had an opportunity to pick up a few assets for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely makes sense. And I hope that he succeeds and that he can stay healthy and he can just really find success, because I did really enjoy him and I liked having him here. And so I wish him the best too, but it definitely made sense making that move because you could afford to. But another thing that concerns me is that week 4 Sunday night football game, primetime against Tampa Bay. which is probably going to be the game of the year, probably like the most watched game of the season, I'd say.
Easily,
And
yeah.
just, I'm excited for the team and what they have built. But that's a lot of pressure for rookies like Mac Jones to be playing it against, the Patriots' former 20-year quarterback, Tom Brady, who just won a Super Bowl with pretty much the same team that they brought back this year, because they pretty much re-signed everybody. And so that, to me, when I'm looking at their schedule, seems like probably the game that I'm the most concerned about in terms of just the pressure that's going to be on the Patriots in that game, and the amount of people that are going to be watching that game, and just the fact that you have a rookie quarterback who, in a game like of that capacity, I think that's definitely pointing to me as the game to be the most concerned about on their schedule right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most highly anticipated regular season game in NFL history. Maybe I can't think of one that's a bigger kind of spectacle. And then now you also have the additional angle where it's Tom Brady against the guy that the Patriots are hoping will replace Tom Brady in Mac Jones, and the fact that Mac Jones is going to be playing against one of the NFL's best defenses in that game. It's the Bill Belichick versus Tom Brady angle. I mean, I don't subscribe too much to this being a kind of legacy game for either side. That if Tom Brady wins, then it's Tom Brady wins the Brady versus Belichick argument. If Belichick wins and he wins, I don't get too worked up about that kind of stuff. But yeah, from a strictly on-field perspective, it's going to be a fascinating game. And the fact that the Patriots' schedule is reasonably soft off the top. I mean, we do expect the Dolphins to be decently competitive this season, but after that, you get the Jets, and then you get the Saints, probably with Jameis Winston at quarterback. So there's a legitimate chance that both of these teams could come into this game 3-0, and it's I'm already excited for it. It's going to be a crazy week, a crazy weekend, a crazy game. I haven't seen what the ticket prices of that game are right now, but I know once as soon as the schedule was released, they were going for like $1,300, $1,400. Yeah, right now on ESPN it says tickets as low as $511. That's actually a little bit lower than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah,
that's not low by any means, but lower than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's going to be the game of the year by far, and obviously a very, very good early test for Mac Jones, who it seems like he has the mental makeup to handle a kind of challenge like that. He did play at Alabama in some very big games down there, and he was able to perform well in those. And just sort of his overall demeanor and what we've heard about him, he doesn't seem like a guy that gets super rattled by pressure or anything like that. But yeah, that game is going to be on a whole other level than anything he's experienced.
Yeah, I mean, he seems very mature and just seems like he handles the pressure really well, just from obviously with seeing him in college and just the importance of a lot of the games that he played in there, and he was able to really stay, calm and collected and handle that pressure. So I think that's a good sign. But you're right, that game I think is going to be the first real test for him in terms of, is this guy really legitimate? Like, is this somebody that really can be the future of this team? And I mean, I'd like to say that the Patriots will win that game, but I think that's going to be a battle, because I mean, you have, obviously the person coming in who was with this team for 20 years and knows the system really well. But then you also have the opposite of that, and Belichick, who knows Brady's playing style really well. So I think it's going to be a battle that entire game. But I think every single football fan can say that that's probably the most anticipated and what will probably be the most watched game of the year. And it's also going to be interesting to see what direction the fans lean in, because I do feel like there might be some Patriots fans that will be rooting for Tom Brady to come back and win that game, because I've had people be mixed on that, because I'm always like, my thought is I want to see Brady succeed. I was happy he won another Super Bowl, but Patriots always come first to me. So it'll be Patriots. I will be rooting for the Patriots, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of what the crowd is made up of for that game, because I do think it'll be mixed.
Definitely. I think how the Patriots start the season is going to play into that a little bit. I think by the end of last year, there were just so many people who were just so unhappy with the team and with the offense and with how everything looked. I think if that continued and you played this game kind of while that sentiment was still in everybody's minds, I think you would see a lot of pro Brady supporters in the crowd. I'm sure Tom Brady's going to get a huge ovation, and obviously he deserves one for everything that he brought to this franchise over the years. But I do think if you see the Patriots start off hot, and if they look good under Mac Jones, and if they do seem like they're kind of moving in the right direction, I don't think you're going to see quite as much, I guess, animosity toward their own team from Patriots fans that you might have otherwise if they continue to look the way that they did last season.
Yeah, and like you said, the schedule does work out in their favor at the beginning with those 3 games. I mean, those first 3 games I'm looking at as all winnable games because, I mean, the Saints are going to be an interesting team this year, like without Drew Brees, their first season without him at quarterback. So that's going to be an interesting situation to see. And I don't know if Jameis Winston is really the guy that can lead them to success either. So I do see 3 winnable games to start the season, which I think is really good for the Patriots momentum wise going into that game. So it is going to be a real good test and a really good way to see if Mac Jones really has the capability of being the guy kind of longer term. But what is your biggest concern with the team going into this season?
My biggest concern with the team is probably their depth at cornerback right now, just because Stephon Gilmore, they kept him on the physically unable to perform list. He will be unavailable to play in at least the first 6 games. He'll be eligible to return in week 7. This came as a little bit of a surprise to me because I thought just with the way that the Patriots constructed their roster, it seemed inevitable that Gilmore was eventually going to come back because they had loaded up at so many other positions. You look around their defense, there's really no glaring weak spots. I mean, they fixed their defensive line. They got some edge rushers in. They got Dante Hightower back. Their secondary, other than that one spot, looks as solid as ever. But with no Gilmore in there now, you're looking at probably Jalen Mills starting at that other outside cornerback spot. He really struggled in that role in Philadelphia. They eventually shifted him to kind of a do-everything safety role. And he seemed to be much better suited for that role than for an outside cornerback spot. And then behind him, you've got Joejuan Williams, who has never really lived up to his draft slot as a 2019 second-round pick. You've got Sean Wade, who they just brought in a trade. I think he's got some potential. He's got some promise. He used to be a projected first-round draft pick until he really struggled in his last season at Ohio State. But they just brought him in. He's a rookie, probably going to take him a little bit of time to fully get up to speed with this defense. So they really don't have a ton of obvious replacements for Stephon Gilmore. And no matter who they stick in there, it's going to be a pretty significant downgrade from Gilmore to whoever that may be, most likely Jalen Mills. And I think that's just a little concerning, especially with how talented the rest of this defense is. If you've got a big weak spot like that, and it can really derail what a team wants to do defensively. And then over on the other side of the field, you've got J.C. Jackson, who was probably the best number 2 cornerback in the NFL last year, but he did have some struggles in games where Gilmore didn't play. So that's going to be a test for him to prove that he can actually be a legitimate number 1 guy, and not just a very, very good number 2 guy. So yeah, definitely I would say cornerback is my number 1 concern for this Patriots team going into the year.
Yeah, it's when Stephon Gilmore, when the news came out that he was going to be missing the first 6 weeks, I was like, that's definitely a concern. Like that's definitely something that we all need to look out for and be aware of, because that's definitely like a weakness without him, I do feel like, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be interesting to see whether the Patriots add anybody at that spot or whether they're comfortable with the players that they have. Because yeah, that's a significant loss for a pretty big chunk of the season.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, at least there's the flexibility and an option to be able to bring somebody else in if they don't feel confident in what they have right now. So it's good that they have that flexibility. And that's something I'm sure that he'll decide later on if he feels like he's not so confident in that makeup right now.
Definitely. Yeah. Obviously room for changes to to the roster over the next couple weeks and months. The initial 53-man roster is never the final 53-man roster, and it's usually not even the week 1 53-man roster. So yeah, we'll definitely see some changes to this Patriots team. We already have seen a few since cut down day. If they're not feeling what Jalen Mills and Joejuan Williams and Shaun Wade are giving them, then I don't think they'll hesitate to go out and bring somebody else in.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hoping. So I think, but again, I trust Belichick, and I think the AFC in general is going to be tough this year. I think there's a lot of teams that are going to be good. I mean, the Titans are a team that is going to be interesting to me. I'm excited to see what the Colts do this year with Carson Wentz. I think that could actually be a really good spot for him, and they're going to be fun to watch. Obviously, Kansas City is still there, and Buffalo. I think Cleveland is going to be an exciting team this year too. I think they have a chance of winning their division this year. So they're going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of tough teams in the AFC this year, which is going to make it more fun. It's not just Kansas City and then everybody else anymore.
Yeah, there's a good amount of depth for sure. All those teams that you mentioned will definitely be in that mix. I mean, I think Baltimore could be up in that mix as well. They've got to figure out their running back situation now. Losing J.K. Dobbins is a pretty significant loss for them. Yeah. And I think the Patriots will be up in that maybe not the top tier, but at least one of the top 2 or 3 tiers. I definitely think that they'll be very much in the hunt for a playoff spot at the very least this year.
Yeah, definitely. And having that extra game is going to be exciting too, because for some teams, having that 17th game could be the reason why some teams get in or don't get into the playoffs too. It's going to be fun to just see how that goes with that extra game in there.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around what all the records are going to be now. I've got to get used to saying 12-5 and 11-6 and all that. My
weird, isn't it?
The last 30 years of my life, I've had certain numbers jammed into my mind, and now I got to recalibrate. So I think that's going to take a little bit of time. But yeah, it'll be. I mean, more football is always fun. I'm sure not every player feels that way, but from an observer standpoint, it'll definitely be good for everybody watching.
Yeah, definitely. And when you mentioned J.K. Dobbins, I mean, I had a fantasy draft like the day before the news came out about him, and I almost drafted him, and I didn't. I ended up going with somebody else. But I'm happy that I didn't. But I told my friends, like, this is why I wait to do fantasy drafts until after preseason is over. And right before the season starts.
Last possible minute. Wait as long as you can. I've got one tonight, and I'm already afraid that somebody's going to get hurt between that and week 1. So yeah, that would be my advice. Wait as long as humanly possible. Do it like next Wednesday night if you can.
Yeah, really. Yeah, but I'm really excited for this season. I think it's going to be a good one for the Patriots, and it's going to be nice after the frustrations that we saw last year. I trust what they're putting together. I mean, the Mac Jones era is now, so that's really exciting. And I think, in some ways, he's a similar player to Brady as well. And so I think that out of all the quarterbacks that were available in this draft class, I feel like Mac is actually the one that is the best fit for the Patriots system. I think that there are other talented quarterbacks that came out of that draft class, but in terms of Mac Jones versus everybody else in the Patriots system, I think he actually is the best fit. So I think it's going to be exciting to see what he can really do.
Definitely. He checks pretty much every box for what the Patriots typically look for in their quarterbacks, whether that's accuracy, intelligence, being able to handle all the stuff before the snap, get the ball out quickly, leadership, all of those things. Pretty much you go down the checklist. And Mac Jones pretty much checks all of them. Obviously, he doesn't have the same physical tools as a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance or Trevor Lawrence or some of these other guys that were drafted at the top of the draft. And we'll see whether those end up holding him back over the course of his career, especially since the NFL is shifting more toward those dual threat quarterbacks that can threaten defenses in multiple ways. That's not really what Mac Jones is, but for Bill Belichick's team and for Josh McDaniels' offense, he definitely seems like a very good fit for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun season, and Oh, it's Go Patriots always, and that's going to be fun to watch. But I really appreciate you joining me on the show. I think this was great, and everybody definitely check Zack's content out. He does a really, really good job of covering football and the Patriots, and definitely has a lot of knowledge. So check him out on social media. Check out his content on NESN and everything else. Does a really, really good job. So again, I appreciate you joining me on the show. Everyone, as always, I appreciate you tuning into the show and supporting it every week. I definitely appreciate all of you, and happy football season and happy fall, and Go Patriots.
Happy football season. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.